These are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Rawson, and I'm Vice President of the DESARA Group. I'd like to thank you for joining the DESARA Group's webinar today. This session will be recorded, so everyone will be muted until the discussion section at the end. Today's webinar is called ISO 9001 2015, What's New? While the last few people are joining in, I'd like to show you how to use the GoToWebinar platform so you can interact with us and control how you view the screen. First of all, let's see, now you probably saw a control panel like this one on your screen. Joe, if you can advance that slide.
Oh, sorry.
Probably saw a control panel like this one, and it's blocking some of what our presentation shows. So just that little orange arrow on the upper left corner of the panel, if you click that, it'll toggle that panel large and small. And then you'll just see the left-hand corner of it still showing, so you can use the other controls that it shows there. Now, if you're looking at the webinar in a small window on your screen, you can use the next button down to maximize it, just below the orange arrow there. You can play with that right now. And then next down the line on that control panel left-hand edge is the raise hand icon. Now and then the speaker may ask for a show of hands to get feedback from everyone. And when we go into discussion mode, you can raise your hand if you'd like to be unmuted so that you can actually have a back and forth with our speaker about answering a question. Only the instructor and myself will be able to see whose hands are raised. So let's try it now. Let's just be sure it's working. Raise your hand if you want to learn more about how companies are handling the risk-based thinking requirement of ISO 9001. Oh, I'm seeing hands go up. So just grab that little hand raise symbol and raise your hand, and I can look up and down the screen and see virtually all the hands are going up. Lots and lots of hands going up want to learn more about risk-based thinking. So you would use that icon if you want to be called on to actually speak aloud when we get into the discussion section. But that's actually what we'll use more in our live virtual classroom training courses, where you can raise your hand and be acknowledged to speak when we're teaching a program. So I'm going to lower everyone's hand now, and then you'll be able to raise them again if you want to get involved in the discussion later on. Like I said, we'll be offering paid live virtual classroom training courses where you won't have to travel. It'll be delivered in a manner very much like this, but we'll keep it small so that people can interact with the instructor in real time. We'll keep the microphones open, and we'll have handouts. So you'll see the next button down on your screen. If you just expand it, if there were handouts for you to pick up, that's where you'd pick them up and download them to your own screen. And then finally, throughout the webinar, when you have comments or you'd like more information on a topic, you can see this questions panel. We're down in the bottom part of it. That's where you can ask a question of us. And I'll keep track of those while our speaker is speaking, and we'll either handle them in real time if it's appropriate, or we'll answer them at the end of the webinar if that makes more sense. And when you ask a question, only the speaker and I can see it, or Joe's screen will actually probably be expanded so he won't see it. And if I can answer it, I will, like if it has to do with sound quality or something like that. If it's relevant to everyone, we may answer in the chat box so everyone can see. Or if you just want to say, hi, Karen, you can do it there too. In a minute, we'll get into the content for today. But Joe, if you'll flip the slide, first I'd like to tell you a little bit about our company and then about our speaker for today. DESARA is a consulting company that started back in 2008 to work with companies who want to improve their effectiveness and efficiency. Typically, we use standards like ISO 9001 as a foundation, and in particular, we're experts in contributing authors to TL 9000, which is the telecom standard built on top of ISO 9001. But we go way beyond just implementing standards with our clients. That's just the starting line to have an organized, systematic approach to quality or information security or environmental management and so on. Where Joe usually fits in, our speaker today, is our real expertise in working with companies who have grown by acquisition or who have implemented new processes, who really need to build on top of what they're already doing very well to become more efficient and effective. So those companies that have complex processes, difficult customer satisfaction issues, they've grown by acquisition and people aren't necessarily talking to each other and making their processes work from end to end. And when they don't, they make big, expensive mistakes. That's the kind of place where that's really DESARA's sweet spot, going in and analyzing and working with you to make those improvements. But you need that baseline management system in place to build on top of. Now, Joe, for example, is an expert in using data to identify and drive out the waste in business processes. And Joe, that next slide's about you with your smiling face on the screen, so go ahead and advance. Joe Barckett is a senior consultant with the DESARA Group, and he's been working in the field of quality improvement for, I guess, your entire career, right, Joe? One way or another.
Too long.
He's a master black belt with a long list of businesses and individual black belts that he's coached to millions of dollars in savings. But at the root of all those savings, and you see a black belt, you see a master black belt, and you think, well, are they really an ISO guy? At the root of all those savings has to be baseline processes that operate in control, so you can sustain the gains once you implement those big leaps. And that's what ISO 9001 should allow companies to achieve. When Joe walks into a business, whether it's a manufacturing, a service company, large or small, to improve their effectiveness using Six Sigma or Lean or any other methods, he's immediately recognizes the state of their quality management system overall. And sometimes they have to get back to basics before they can even start with the major improvement projects. So he has deep reserves of knowledge on standards, and he brings all of that to the discussion on how this new version can help organizations reach new levels of effectiveness. In fact, I know Joe's done a lot of work with us on business continuity planning, on risk management and risk mitigation. So he'll bring all of that, those things that TL 9000 and some of the other standards have already implemented in them, he brings that into his work with ISO 9001. So now I'd like to turn the mic over to Joe Barckett for our presentation, ISO 9001 2015, What's New?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Karen, for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to stop sharing my webcam so that you can all focus in on more of the presentation and not my pretty face over there. Here's our agenda slide for today. Our goal basically is to provide you with a high-level look at the changes in the standard. We'll talk about why the change. We'll talk about several new concepts in the 2015 Rev, as well as the reorganized format. And we'll even spend a few minutes on some of the changed wording that things have happened in the new standard. So there's a copy of the new standard, at least the front end, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask you several questions. First off, are you tired of having too much focus on documentation and really not enough on an improvement piece in your business? Has management in your organization been supportive but not really committed to ISO 9001? Are you fed up over the lack of understanding of preventive action? I love my Jackie Chan over here. And does your organization have a lack of root cause analysis and continual improvement? In addition to that, do you have multiple management systems that, for whatever reason, they don't seem to be compatible with each other? And people keep asking you, what is the value add for ISO 9001? The updated standard is an attempt to address all of these issues, these concerns, and these questions, along with a few more. If we take a quick look at the revision history, what we saw in 1987 was that there were 20 elements with 3 certifiable standards, for those of you that remember way back then. We had ISO 9001, we had ISO 9002, and we had ISO 9003. Changes were made in the 1994 Rev, but it wasn't a major Rev in that the structure pretty much stayed the same. It was still clause by clause prescriptive. 87 and 94 at some level were product-based, a lot more quality control and quality assurance. In 2000, there was a major Rev and the process approach was introduced. 20 elements sort of went away. It also had less focus on documentation. The 2008 Rev, again, no major change in structure, but there were several changes, and these two standards were very, very much process-based. So we introduced the process approach. As opposed to thinking about elements, we were going to audit at the process level. 2015 is a major change. It's now performance-based. If the 87 standard was product-based and the 2000 standard was process-based, the 2015 standard is performance-based. There is a key structural change, which we'll talk about. And if we think through it, there are three keys to the new standard: process, risk, and PDCA. 2023, if that's when the next one happened, who knows really what's going to come out there. But I think we can all look at 9004, and it'll provide some insight into some of the new concepts that might be introduced in there. So why the change? That's why we've gone through it. That's one of the reasons that the standard has been revved. We're looking at changes in focus, we're looking at changes in structure, and we're looking at changes to help us integrate several of the management systems. Let's talk a little bit about some new concepts. These new concepts have basically increased the scope of the QMS. We've seen that from major rev to major rev. The quality management system circle gets a little bit larger and a little bit larger every time they have a major rev. You know, if they could stop adding the scope, we'd have a lot better, a lot easier task. But the scope has been increased. And let's talk about some of the things that have been added. Clause 4, context of the organization. What does that even mean? And I know some of you had a question about it when you signed up. There's new requirements in here. And 4.1 basically talks about understanding the organization and its context. They want you to look at the relevant internal and external issues that are affecting the quality management system. 9000 has some notes in it that refer to not just context, but business environment and organizational environment. So once again, they're expanding the quality management system a little bit. 4.3, clause 4.3 in the new standard, has some beefed up requirements about the scope of the organization. So there are new things that we need to look at there as well. Another thing that's been added in that clause is interested parties. You know, who are these people? If we take a look at ISO 9004, they discuss potential interested parties as everyone from suppliers to employees to stockholders, surrounding communities, and of course our customers. If we look at the old standard, we specifically talked about customers in terms of who the interested parties were in our quality management system. Again, now we've expanded that circle. The good news is that it's up to you to decide who these interested parties are. As long as you can show that the people you've selected have an effect on your quality management system and their internal requirements are being met effectively. Preventive action hasn't really been added. In fact, the wording is gone. They've introduced, as I'm sure most of you know, this thing called risk-based thinking. The thought behind it is, what is preventive action other than risk reduction? So in 611, it states that organizations shall consider the risks that need to be addressed. And the term preventive action has been removed from the standard. And risk takes its place. So risk-based thinking is introduced, and they dedicate a part of Annex A, specifically Section 4, to it, as well as 6.1. There's a requirement to perform a risk analysis, but you decide on the level of detail appropriate to your business. It could be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. It can be as formal as an FMEA. But again, you make that decision. And you decide based on your organization's needs and its effectiveness. Other notable items. Clause 5 in the 2000 Rev is the only clause that remained in the same place. In 2008, it was labeled management responsibility, and in 2015, it is now retitled leadership. Just the word change from management to leadership beefs up this section a little bit. The quality policy in 5.2 has a few more requirements in it, as well as the quality objectives have been beefed up. They've sort of gone to the SMART acronym: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And so 6.2 has those pieces involved in it. They've also reintroduced or introduced the PDCA Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. And that takes part in the continual root cause improvement piece. It's stressed. And in fact, for those of you that remember the turtle diagram, it is back in some format. For those of you that don't know the turtle diagram, it is basically a system that looks at the processes. So they've included this process schematic in the standard. And this process schematic for Lean Six Sigma folks is SIPOC, suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, and customers. And so they've not only introduced the SIPOC, or the process schematic, that has pieces of the old turtle diagram in it, but they've also reintroduced the PDCA diagram. And they're putting the clauses into context for you. So the planning clauses, the do clauses, the check, and the act. And on the left-hand side, we have inputs into this PDCA, or quality management system. Again, the organization and its context, customer requirements, needs and expectations of those relevant interested parties that we talked about. The outputs here are customer satisfactions along with our products and services, and those are the results of our QMS. So they've got a nice schematic that ties all of the clauses together into the PDCA cycle. In addition to some of the new concept, they've reorganized the format. And so let's talk about Annex SL a little bit. As I'm sure you're aware of, the Annex SL has done just that. They've taken the structure from 2008 and revamped it pretty much dramatically. One of the key reasons to do this was to help with the integrated management systems. And so we'll see some standardization moving forward between 14,001, 18,001, and 9,001. So for those of you that have multiple management systems in place, the integration is going to be a lot easier for you. The structure, if we look at it, has been pretty much rearranged. The old structure, we had 8 clauses in the 2008 standard. In the new standard, we now have 10. If we look at 4 is the new piece, and we've talked a lot about the fact that it has context of the organization. It talks about interested parties. 5 has been beefed up, and this is the only place where things remain the same. Management responsibility 5 is now turned into 5 leadership. 6 planning has some new concepts. Risk is one of them, and it takes some of the old concepts and requirements out of the old section 4 and brings them together in new 6. Clause 7, which is support, is basically, some people would say, this is the reason why Annex SL was developed. The concepts in section 7 are across the board in all the integrated management standards. And so it has pieces from the old 4, some of the old 6, and clearly some of the old 7, which is the product realization piece. Clause 8 is operation, and essentially this is the old 7. It's got design and development in it, it's got purchasing, it's got product realization, and it's got non-conforming product as well. 9 is new, and 9 has brought together performance issues. So they've gone to section 5 of the old standard, and they pulled in management review. They've gone to section 8, and they pulled in internal auditor. And they brought them together into how are we going to evaluate the performance of our management system. And then lastly, section 10 is corrective action and continual improvement. So it grabbed what was left out of section 8 and brought it together into the improvement category. So these are the new clauses in the 2015 standard. The one that's totally new, as we've said earlier, is clause 4, the context of that organization. So in addition to some new concepts and to some new structures, we brought in some new words. And the new wording change is something that we can spend a little bit of time on. As we've already talked about, interested parties had been brought in the new section 4. And again, you decide for your organization who these interested parties are. Risk has been brought in, and in fact, risk shows up, the word risk shows up about 50 times in the new standard. And so it is very, very heavy on discussing risk, but not prescriptive as to how you have to deal with that. The term external provider now encompasses both suppliers and subcontractors. So those words have almost disappeared from the standard, and now external provider is in place for that. I think probably the most extensive change has happened with documented information. And so the focus on documentation has changed quite a bit. There is no longer any required procedures in the new standard. So the old 6 required procedures that we used to talk about, document control, record control, internal audits, non-conforming product, corrective action, preventive action, are no longer required. They're not a shall in the document at all. There is not even a mention of a quality manual in the new document. The required documented information includes a quality policy, quality objectives, and an interaction chart. And the term documented information actually replaces procedure and record. And the way we know the difference is the prefix for that term, documented information. So for example, if the standard says maintain documented information, they're generally talking about a procedure. If the standard says retain documented information, they're generally talking about a record. I want to make sure that you write down your questions, so I'll give you a little bit of a reminder to ask questions that we can answer at the end of our talk here today. Our next section talks a little bit about what's next. What are we going to do? How are we going to move forward? What's the next steps in our process to get to 2015? And I think they're pretty straightforward. First of all, you need to become familiar with the new requirements. Attend a course. Watch some of the online webinars like this one. Obviously, read the standard. And so you need to become familiar with what has changed in addition to what we've talked about today. And then you also need to understand how they affect your company. When you look at courses, we want to make sure that you attend a good course. And we want to make sure that you're not just going to get educated, but that you're also going to be trained. That is, that you're going to get some experience in what these changes mean for your company, and maybe even a little bit of experience in workshops about how to do things in your organization with these changes. The third thing we'd like you to do is educate your top management. Clearly, leadership is emphasized more in this standard as it has in the past. Just the name change emphasizes it more. This is a performance standard, so we're going to be able to look more at the performance of the quality management system than we have in the past. And commitment, not just support, is really what senior management needs to do. The last thing we want you to do is re-examine your quality manual. A lot of you probably have multiple 30-page quality manuals that are really tailored or mimic the standard. This is your opportunity to go back in and make it more useful to your stakeholders. Reduce its size. Put in only what's necessary for your business and what's going to help your stakeholders understand how your business goes about its work on a daily basis. When should you begin? Start now. One of the issues that you're going to run into is if everybody waits until September 2018, we're not going to have the certification bodies clearly aren't going to have enough people to do the audits in time. So you should start now and not wait until we have that rush in September 2018. It's in your best interest to get moving now. For those of you that have just gotten re-registered or just registered, you will have until September 2018 to do that. For those of you that have registrations coming up next year or the year after that, they will not register to the 2008 standard after September of 2016. So if your re-registration audit isn't until after September of 2016 next year, then you will get re-registered to the 2018 standard anyways. So don't wait. Start learning the new standard today. Start educating management on the new requirements that the standard now rolls out for you. In summary, basically the standard has moved from a product standard to a performance standard. There's a whole bunch of new requirements that you need to understand how it applies to your business. And basically, don't wait to get started. Start early and get going before the big rush to get certified is in place. I'm going to turn it over back to Karen now, and Karen's going to talk a little bit about questions and maybe even give us a little bit of a commercial for DESARA. Karen? Are you there?
Oh shoot, that was my problem. I didn't unmute myself. I saw you come to the end there. Joe, I've been monitoring the questions as they've been coming in, and I
Good.
know you went through very quickly through a lot of the information, but I think this is really going to come alive a lot more when we get into questions. So I'll be reading
Good.
those aloud, and I want to encourage people. Joe just gave you a flavor for a lot of what's in the standard. So go ahead and write those comments and questions in. But we're going to have some questions about elaborating on product versus performance, about the CB's role in risk-based thinking. Joe, I'm tipping you off so you can get your notes together.
Got it.
One question about outsourcing and partnering. What's in the standard about outsourcing and partnering, and how does that affect what we've done up until now? Is it very different? Question on internal audits and requirements for training internal auditors. Question on is it necessary to purchase the standards? ISO 9000 as well as ISO 9001. How valuable are those? Let's see, more on leadership, more on training, more on communication, and documentation. Is it necessary to renumber everything? So while I've tipped my hand to some of the questions that we've got plenty of time to go through, I just thought I'd mention some of what DESARA has out there in terms of support for organizations going through this. Now, as you know, a lot of the certification bodies have been urging everyone to get started. Don't wait. Just what Joe said. They are terrified that everybody's going to wait till the end and say, oh my gosh, it's August of 2018. That's when I want to do my certification. A lot of people probably want to wait until their next triennial, which may be in 2018, and then they run out of auditors who are qualified or run out of dates on the schedule. So CBAs have been urging everyone to get an official gap assessment as far as where they stand against the standard. Now, gap assessments, you line up a grid that shows what does the new standard require and how does that map to what the old standard required, the old version required, and where do we stand against that? And the easy answer to that is that not much has changed. We can write some stuff up. We can get through this without a lot of effort. We can get certified with some hand waving. And that would be a tremendous disservice to your organization. You know, when I look at it, when I look at what's changed in the companies that we serve since 2000, the last iteration of the standard, a lot of stuff has changed. Whole management teams, locations, partner relationships, outsourcing, the whole thing. A gap assessment that just says, does our documentation stand up? Do we need to renumber it? Is really just saying let's keep doing business as usual when we have a chance to focus on what's changed. Now, all a CB can do is come in and say you meet or don't meet the requirements. They can't offer you any advice. They can't offer, well, this meets, but we'd really like to see a lot more. I mean, they have to be very guarded in the way that they say something to maintain their impartiality. That's part of their certification as certification bodies, their ability to stay in the business of offering certificates. So whether you do your gap assessment yourself with your own knowledgeable people or with folks from, sister organization, a facility that's across the country or around the world, whether you call in somebody from outside, I think the most important thing is to take a good hard look. And what DESARA does, and we'll be offering, I show a link there in the upper right-hand box to our gap assessment service. What we do when we come in is actually make it a facilitated workshop, not just an audit where we go through and interview people and look at records and data and say you meet or don't meet. We'll give you a thorough analysis as well as begin the work on, well, where are the risks? That's part of your risk-based thinking. Who are the interested parties? How is leadership involved? So we get those discussions going, and sometimes having somebody from outside your organization, even if it's just somebody from a sister plant or a peer of your own at a management level in another facility, can get those discussions going more effectively than you can yourself in a leadership role, or than a CB who just comes in and gives a green light, red light kind of report. Another way that DESARA can help, Joe mentioned get trained and take a get educated and take a good program. Well, I think everybody on this call, by the way, I keep saying CB, that's your certification body. That is your registrar, the guy who comes out and does or person or team of people who comes out and does the full analysis and says you're either worthy of a certificate or not. Got to watch it on the acronyms there. I see another question that came in here, and I just want to see. Okay, we'll address that third question in a minute. It's about when an organization can be certified. So, as far as understanding the new standard, DESARA offers a transition training program, and what we found from our clients, particularly when you're the lone wolf in an organization or a very small group that can't all travel together, or you're the kind of organization that can't free up 5 people, 10 people to all go to a class together in one location, what we're offering is, yes, we'll come on site and do those kinds of programs, but we'll also offer public, where anybody can sign up together, or company-based, instructor-led live virtual classroom sessions. So much like today, you'll have handouts, you'll have your copy of the presentation that you can take notes on, and we'll offer a basic introduction to ISO 9001:2015 in 5 one-hour sessions. They'll be recorded so that you can, for the next 7 days, have access to watch them. If you miss a session, you have 7-day access to those 5 one-hour sessions. Detailed review, not the cursory overview of what maps to what, like Joe just gave, but digging into what does this requirement say, what does it mean, chance to ask questions about how it applies to your organization, follow-on exercises to do your own assessment of how you apply. Those are $495 per person for that session, and group rates apply whether you have us come in or whether you sponsor a session across multiple virtual classrooms in your company. A third thing that a lot of companies will need help with is obtaining organizational commitment. What do we have to do? When do we need to do it? Who's going to get it done? How do we go about it? What order? And that's where DESARA comes in and really facilitates those on-site workshops with get the right stakeholders in the room. I should have my camera on for this. Getting the stakeholders in the room, the people who will be doing the changes, where you can sit down across from each other and say, well, what about this? What about that? And what's changed? And isn't this good enough? And how are we going to go about it? DESARA has a proven methodology for working organizations through that. So there's a link there to where we do the on-site work, and we'll have a webinar out on how that actually works. It'll be more of a sales pitch, as well as some tips on how you can do that same kind of thing if you're well staffed in your organization, like some of the larger organizations are, who want to do it yourself using some of our methodologies. And finally, this relates to one of the questions that came in. So Joe, I'll let you take a stab at it first. The question was, what are we required to do for internal auditor training? And let's see, and what are the how will it affect internal auditors? So Joe, you want to take a stab at what internal auditors will need to do and when they'll need to do it to prepare for ISO 9001:2015?
Sure. There aren't many changes in the internal auditor requirements. I mean, basically the organization does them at their own planned intervals, and the internal auditors need to be competent. And so the competency requirements, again, are determined by the organization. And as long as the audits are proven to be effective, the certification body really isn't going to do much with it. Define the audit criteria and scope for each of the audits. There's some new pieces to it. They talk about making sure that we've got the right auditors, impartiality, the independence issue is still there, and also that the results of these audits are reported to management. All of those things were basically in the old standard. And so there's nothing new. They've just repositioned it into the performance evaluation piece.
And the question that we had that came along with that on the same subject, I'll pick it up right now, was, is our training of auditors accredited to Exemplar Global, former RABQSA? And the DESARA Group is not an accredited training provider, but what we find that allows us to do is customize each training program to meet the specific needs of those organizations. When you get into the certified programs, those are very effective for people who want to go on and have a career as an auditor. They may need the accredited information. If you have it written into your own quality management system that accredited training is required, go back to what the standard actually says. It does not require any kind of any particular body of knowledge. It suggests basing on ISO 19011, which all of our training is, but it gives us the flexibility to focus on what works very well for your organization. When we go into organizations, we'll actually pull their documentation, their management system forms and templates, and some have online tools that they use, and we integrate those into the class for your company when we come in-house. We'll also be able to do some of the internal audit upgrade training virtually, the live training that we've done for those who just need a run through what are the new requirements, as well as refresher training for tips for auditing in more advanced methods. But at this point, you may find, and we've got a number of clients that we're doing this with, have said, you know, now is a good time to approach our internal auditing in a little bit different method. One client that I was just speaking with at a Quest Forum meeting was talking about they've moved to outsourcing their audits because what they appreciate is that when the consultant, when the DESARA, the person like Joe or myself or any of our consultants are in there doing the audits for them, it's an added check at an eyeball-to-eyeball level of proficiency with third-party auditors or with supplier auditors that come in. Not being afraid, an additional level of impartiality, but an additional level of the ability to comment, to offer some consultative services in the closure of audit findings afterwards, because we're not bound to be impartial, we're functioning as internal auditors to your system. So rather than going through all of the time and expense all at once to upgrade internal auditors, some clients are saying it may behoove us to have DESARA take over our internal audits, do the planning, the executing, the reporting, educate our internal audit staff as we move through the transition so that when we get there, we may be ready to take on that internal audit and do on-the-job competency development rather than sitting in a classroom and taking a 3-day internal audit program, which can be effective, but our internal audit training we generally couple with an audit workshop where we supervise folks while they go through their first audit so they get a flavor for more effective auditing techniques. Now, the last item, let's see, let's go back to some of these questions here. Joe, are you prepared to take some more? One of them was on, you mentioned twice, the beginning and the end of the presentation, is that the standard has moved from a product-based standard to a performance-based standard. Did I get that wording right that you said? It's a question.
Yes, you did. And in fact, they've got a clause in it called performance evaluation. And so they're not only looking at doing the old 823 and 824 product measures and process measures, but now they've got a whole section geared towards how we can evaluate the performance of your management system. And it talks about customer sat. It talks about the analysis and evaluation. That was in 8.4. And it pulls into this section the internal audit that we just talked about, as well as the management review. And so part of the effort here is to take this standard and have the auditors not only look to see compliance, are we meeting what we say we do, you know, do what you say what you do kind of thing, but how effective is this system now? And so from my point of view, this is going to allow the auditors, the internal auditors at least rather, to start holding management responsible for the performance of the value and evaluation of your management system. These weren't that strong before. They were spread out throughout the standard, and you had to go and pick and choose and say, yeah, there's a piece over here and there's a piece over here. But to have a whole clause dedicated to performance evaluation, to me that says that they're really looking at what's the value add of ISO 9001 to your business. And if it isn't adding value, then you need to know about that, and you need to do something about it as well.
Joe, I think you hit on something really important there. This is something that third-party auditors, the certification body auditors, are going to have to emphasize in their audits, and organizations may not be ready for it. It's a different way of auditing. It's the
I
way
agree.
it's the way that I've seen you audit the entire time we've been together. Whenever we've gone out on audits together, you look at the effectiveness of the process. I mean, that was the first thing I ever hear you ask about. What are the objectives? What's the performance here? You dig into the data. You're a data guy, mathematician,
I am.
statistics.
And what this might mean for your internal auditors, going back to the prior question, is that there are a lot of internal auditors, a lot of auditors in general, that are not very comfortable with data analysis. So for them to go in and ask for, show me your data on on-time delivery, show me your data on product or process, they're not comfortable enough looking at that data and doing some logical analysis of it. So from the internal auditor point of view, one of the things that you may think through is, how am I going to get my internal auditors trained so that they're comfortable with looking at performance measures and they're comfortable looking at control charts or graphs or just data in general. And that might be another competence piece that you introduce into your auditors.
I'd like to ask for a show of hands here at this point in the webinar. Out of all the folks on the line here, I realize some people may be multitasking at this point in the presentation. So come on back, because I want to ask you a question. Joe and I have seen, when we've been out auditing, that a lot of internal auditors are reluctant to ask for the data. They ask for documents and records. They look at how people actually perform the work. They look for, they maybe look for trend lines, or are tests done on products and so forth. I'm thinking in particular about software development, Joe. When we've gone in and done software development audits, what are your measures on this process? That's a tough one to get people to turn loose of, to come up with data. So I'd like to ask for a show of hands among the people on the line. Raise your hand if you feel that you have effective internal audits regarding data, regarding proving that processes are effective. Okay, I'm seeing, I put everybody's hand down there. It's a real, there's just a handful. I would say that it's probably not 15%, not 20% of the people on the line. And that's one of the things that we have emphasized, not so much in the classroom portion of our audit. We teach it how to use data to dig into, to formulate your audit plan, what you can do in advance and what you can expect your auditees to come forward with, and how to educate your organization for to be prepared for third-party audits. This is something that you're going to need your internal auditors to become adept at as they perform the internal audits in preparation for your certification assessment. Are your auditees ready? Have they answered the kinds of questions about, prove to me the effectiveness of your process? Show me how you measure. Show me your results. So that's why one of the things that we do with our clients when we model the auditing through the outsourced internal audit process, we show them how to do that. We show them how to ask tough questions, how to hold management accountable.
What else we got, Karen?
We have another one here on how will CBs audit risk-based thinking?
So that's a good question. We haven't had a lot of 2015 CB audits yet, so it remains to be seen. But let me tell you what we're telling our clients, and several of us actually teach lead auditor courses, so we're teaching the future lead auditors as to what to look for. There's no formal requirement in the standard that you do a very formal risk assessment program. It can be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet where you list the interested party, you list the risks that those interested parties pose to your quality management system, and then you list what you're doing about that. Are you going to accept the risk? Are you going to mitigate the risk? Whatever it is. It can be that simple, or it can be as complex as a formal failure mode effects analysis, FMEA, calculating an RPN, risk priority number. The bottom line is that it's up to you. And so when the certification bodies come in, they're going to ask you, what have you done? And you're going to be able to show them what is appropriate to your business. They're going to look to see, did you do something? Because that's the requirement. And then they're going to look to see, is it effective? And so they're only going to be able to look at the effectiveness of the system. So if you can demonstrate no matter what system you used, very, very simple or very complex, that system has been affected over the time period, and effectiveness could result in not getting any customer complaints, not getting any returns, not getting any warranties, then they're going to be happy with it. There's no one way or one tool that they're going to have to look at to say that you've done your risk management. So I think it's going to be very interesting over the next 2 or 3 years to see how companies determine that they are going to assess their own risk. The bottom line is most of you are probably doing something already anyways, and it's a matter of formalizing that, putting it on a piece of paper so that you can demonstrate to the certification body and to your management that you've looked at risk, you've identified the higher risk and maybe mitigated them, and some of those lower risks you've just accepted. So I think it's going to be a very, very interesting time to see how the certification bodies wind up looking at the risk analysis that companies are going to be doing.
I think the risk assessment, risk analysis, risk-based thinking begins at this transition period, like where you said it's up to you to decide who your interested parties are. Okay, so if you leave out any important interested parties, your CB, your certification body, is going to have something to say about that. They may consider that an unacceptable risk in your system. We had a question about outsourcing, and we will do a whole webinar on outsourcing. We're not going to get deeply into that today. But for example, you can't simply wash your hands of the responsibility for your outsourced subcontract manufacturer to make sure that your product meets customer specs. Okay, you've got to be sure that if the customer is buying from you, you've seen that outsourced process through with appropriate controls. So over the last 7 to 15 years, since you took a long, hard look at your management system, some things have changed. Those are the risks and those are, in some cases, the interested parties that you need to be documenting. Well, if not documenting, then you need to demonstrate that you have evaluated and addressed within your management system. And when your partners, when your outsourced suppliers make changes to their processes, that's a risk to your business. Those are the kinds of things that I would be looking at as an auditor, and I think we can expect third-party auditors as well as your customer auditors, the folks who come in and audit your business and say, we want to do business with you or continue doing business with you. They'll be taking a stronger look at risk. So we'll be having a webinar on that coming up, and we'll also, that's the kind of thing that DESARA would include in an in-house workshop where we really work through who are the interested parties and what are the risks associated with those interested parties and what level of leadership, management oversight and leadership commitment do we need to see across all of those.
Karen, we get time for a few more?
We have one more actual clarification that came in, and I'm not sure the source of this clarification, but it is accurate, that talks about when do you have time, when do you get certified to 2015. It says that companies can be certified to the 2008 version up until September 2018. However, I mean, you can recertify somebody past September 2016 to 2018. The problem is that in September of 2018, the certificate ends its validity. It is no longer valid after September of 18. You say you're certified in 2008, but that doesn't count as an ISO 9001 certification. You don't just roll over. So accreditation bodies are working with their certification bodies on when they're ready to give to provide 2015 certifications, and each CB can decide when they won't go past a certain date. I know of at least one that said that we will not issue new 2008 certificates after September. So that gives leeway to companies who may be in transition, and certainly for those who are also certified to something like TL 9000, where the new standard won't even be available for certification until third or fourth quarter next year, that you may want to plan your certification, time your upgrade against that. But Joe, is there anything else that you see on the question list that you want to answer now, or anything else we'll certainly answer in newsletters, blog posts, and future webinars?
I think we've answered all of them to my satisfaction. If other folks have other issues, then let's bring them up. Okay, I don't see anything coming in for the last few minutes.
So I will encourage you to stay in touch with the DESARA. We've helped management system implementation for many companies over the years, and we'd really like to work with you to customize your transition program to the very level of your needs. You may have a whole bunch of things that you're DIY, do it yourself on, and some things that you just say a little outside perspective with the internal audits, with the risk-based thinking, with the interested parties and leadership commitment and so forth. Some of those things that may be new concepts. Very happy to come in and customize a workshop to meet your needs. Watch for information about our upcoming live training. You can go to the website right now and put your request in for information on that, and we'll work with you on exactly what timing you'd like for that. I'd like to thank you all again for joining. Visit our website, stay in touch with us via our newsletters, and of course, we're always welcome. Looking forward to helping out. Thanks everyone
Thank
for
you all.
attending. Bye-bye.